I've been asked to talk a little bit about tomorrow. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about my past as well. But the theme for me really is about how the pharmaceutical industry absolutely has to adapt and embrace the changes that it's fundamentally perhaps not driving. We are all being affected by the changes that technology is bringing to society. But that is something that we all have to accept. We can't necessarily change it, but we can certainly adapt from that environment, and we can certainly embrace the changes. And there's ways of doing that, I believe, that will be very positive for everybody. The reason I'm going to talk a little bit about my past when we're talking about the future is really just to put into context the fact that I haven't had a linear career journey. And so for many of you, if you have had a linear journey within the pharmaceutical industry, it doesn't mean you can't change. But what I'm trying to encourage you also to think about is what other skill sets can you, what other industries or similar business models can you use your skills in order to adapt and evolve in this new environment, and also to think about what's going to be fun for you at this stage in your career. I did start my career in the pharmaceutical industry. I'm more of a commercial person. I carried the bag. My first job was selling drugs to doctors. I'm very much a commercial person, but I became an entrepreneur. And actually one of the themes that I see that's going to be so relevant moving forward is how the pharmaceutical industry has to become more entrepreneurial. And I don't mean in a sort of run fast, break things kind of Silicon Valley way. I'm not a big fan of that for sure. But you know, it's something that it was a great place for me to train in my career. I'm glad I started there, but I didn't stay within the industry. I became an entrepreneur as a pharmaceutical services professional. So I've got a lot of experience selling into the pharmaceutical industry, and I've been doing that for most of my career. I raised private equity capital to build a global brand from that pharmaceutical services model. And it was really tough, actually, because when you're trying to innovate, when the industry isn't prepared or isn't really understanding what you're trying to innovate, it's super tough. So I definitely know how to adapt to a tough environment, and I certainly also know how to be resilient through that process. So I've done a number of things, built a global brand, brought in private equity. I led a major clinical operations turnaround, a very big European home care business. I'd never done that before. But I was using the skills that I'd learned along the way, doing all the things that I'd done. I founded a digital startup, which was quite an interesting journey in 2020. Would I have done it at a different time? Maybe. But I learned a lot as a result of doing that. I'm not a techie either, so I'm a commercial person through and through. But I could see the opportunity, and I could see where the industry needed to go. And because I spent most of my time on the pharma service side, most of the time in those business offerings, I was dealing directly with patients who needed access to therapies, whether it was in the home or whether they were in a completely different country. So the patient angle for me has always been the most important thing. And I think that being maybe slightly contentious, that's often been lacking when you're within the pharmaceutical industry. So I've come at this from a very different angle. I was driven to do that digital startup business because of my experience as a pharma services professional. I'm used to disruption and transformation, and I kind of like it, actually. And I think that for those of you that are at this stage in your career, I would really encourage you to think about what you can do with your skills that enables you to be far more disruptive and enable you to do things that maybe you've not been able to do within your role within the pharma industry. It was the best training I ever had, working for Johnson & Johnson, but I never got training like it since. I had to teach myself, and I learned along the way from my clients, from my investors. So it's not always an easy journey, but I think if you've got the right personality or you're prepared to take a leap, I would really encourage you to do it. What do I do today? Well, I sort of segued into the health tech, the med device world, which came about because I was approached by some investors. So you can see that my career path has not been linear at all, but I've ended up, it's been fascinating actually, despite the hurdles and the challenges and the battles, particularly when I've got a pharmaceutical company as a client, not that easy. It's just been really fascinating for me, and I feel very excited about where the industry is at this point in time. So I chair a number of medtech companies. I work very closely with founders, management teams, and particularly investors who are not actually very familiar with commercializing med device and med tech. And I tend to get the problem children as well. So when things are going a little bit pear-shaped because the skills have not been within that organization, or when the investors have done the due diligence, they come to people like me and say, help, what can we do now? So it's been an interesting journey, and I feel that that journey is going to continue because a lot of the skills I've built over the last few years are now becoming more and more relevant. So let's talk about the macro environment. And again, I'm thinking about the future, but I'm also thinking about what's been going on over the last few years. I'm just going to repeat some of the things that have already been said, or we'll think about the context of the conversation we've had today. I don't need to repeat some of that. Obviously, it's been a really tough situation for a lot of people. We've talked about the redundancies. We've talked about the challenges in gaining investment across the globe. I'm based in the US as well, so I see the perspective there. Sometimes it's very different to what's going on here, but I also think that gives me a pretty good perspective on what's going on a global scale. You know, the pharma industry, big pharma, dictated the industry for decades and decades, and that is just no longer the case. It's very vulnerable. We've talked about how it's outsourced over the years, and actually it's created far greater competition when you think about it as a result of that. We've talked a lot about technology today. I don't need to repeat that, but we are seeing that technology is actually driving a lot of the change, pushing, forcing the change in an industry that has been very much self-controlled and very much in charge of and dictating, I think, the environment, whether it's paying the payment system, whatever drugs come to market, where the investment is going to be. But what we are seeing now is technology changing rapidly the environment that we're in, and that is going to continue. I don't think it's all upside, by the way, but it's definitely going to continue. And what we've seen, and this has been touched on as well already today, is a lot of that change is being forced from outside the industry. We're not necessarily seeing all the innovation coming from within pharma, within biotech, and it can be very, very segmented as well. And we need to see much broader skills coming together and working more collaboratively much more early. But we're seeing, obviously, the impact of these very large organizations who do not have the skills, do not understand the healthcare environment. And that's where all of this skill, where the industry really has a role to play moving forward, because you can't just apply the tech without understanding how that technology is going to be applied. And if you think about some of the investments that have been made, I've certainly seen it through COVID. There was so much investment in health tech, so much money just being plowed into health tech, and a lot of that tech actually hasn't proven itself to be of value, or not yet, or maybe not at all. There's been a lot of investment going into great ideas, and not every piece of technology is actually going to create a great business. So we've seen a lot of wins, but there's also there's a building graveyard of technologies where a lot of money has gone and a lot of money has been wasted. We can't affect everything. We can't impact everything. We are being done to in many respects. That's as a society and a workforce. But we can affect some of the changes, and we can take control of our careers and look at where our skill sets are going to be best deployed. And I think that what technology brings to the table today for people like us is the opportunity to utilize those skills in a very different way to how we might have used them before, working, for example, for me, working more on the med device side than the pharma side. Super, super interesting. But also how that is going to partner. I'm seeing more of a convergence with med tech and therapies, and I think that's super exciting. And of course, the other challenge, which again is where I think technology really plays a role, is to demonstrate value. Just bringing a therapy to market is not necessarily enough. We know even if you get approval, you might not get reimbursement. I think that there's real opportunity. I work closely with a lot of companies who are monitoring patients remotely in the home, elsewhere. And it's all about value demonstration. Does this drug work? Is it effective? How is it effective? How is that patient responding? And this is all the kind of stuff that I'm involved with today, that if I look back at when I started my career, would I have thought that that's the way my career would have gone? Absolutely not. Did I have the skills to do some of that? No, but I've learned it along the way because I'm interested, because I've had the opportunity to work with some of these innovative companies. The other point that's been made already today is the fact that this is a huge market. It's a massive market and a massive opportunity, which is why we are seeing non-traditional healthcare players moving into this space. Somebody else mentioned Google already today, mentioned Amazon today. You know, we're going to see more and more of that. It doesn't mean they should have the whole pie, right? I kind of feel like, as well for British companies, the point was also made that everyone runs off to the US. It's a market where, yes, there's a lot of money, but there's also the worst possible health outcomes. And I think that there's a lot that the world can learn from what goes on in the UK, as tough as it is to bring a new innovation to the market and get NHS adoption. I don't think we should just assume that we all have to run off to the US and that's going to be the panacea either. I really believe that that isn't necessarily the case, but it goes back to the point about demonstrating value moving forward, and I think we're going to see more and more of that, particularly in the US market. But we are in an environment where the traditional pharma model has definitely changed, it's definitely evolved, and some of that, perhaps most of it, has not evolved because the industry wants to evolve, it's because it's being done too. And I see that that is going to continue, but I actually think, maybe to some of your points, Andrew, as well, I actually think we're going to start to see healthcare, life sciences start to create a much stronger position for itself, because we do have access to data, we do know how to engage with patients. It's not all about the technology, and the technology itself has to, I mean, how many apps can you use to receive better treatment, or to improve your health, or ensure that your drug is effective? How many apps do you actually need, and how does that fit into your pathway? How does that impact the health system and the people that are trying to care for you? So it's not always quite straightforward, and I think that level of complexity is actually an advantage in this industry. It's not always very easy for the big players with all the money and all the bravado to assume that they know exactly how to treat patients. So I think there's a lot of potential here for all of us moving forward. Bigger is not always better. The point was just made as well. A lot of what pharma does is already outsourced. Right? Actually, it's created competition, but it's created opportunity when you think of where we are today. So really, is the talent already on the outside? Would be my question to you. I think it is. Obviously, we're thinking about the context of Phraktion, and I know we've talked a lot about talent today, and again, I'm going to reiterate some points, but the question about shortage came up earlier, and the shortage is some of these skill sets that leaders and senior executives in this industry and other industries as well have. It's how you can now adapt the environment, adapt to the environment with the skills that you've got. Some of those leadership skills are significantly missing in earlier stage businesses. There's so many companies I work with who have hit the wall because they haven't really thought about the longer term strategy, or they've got really excited about the technology and have iterated with the technology, and then actually they've forgotten that they need to generate revenue and nobody's buying it. So it's simple. It's the subject matter experts as well, and a lot of you will be subject matter experts, and it's not just in commercial, it's across the piece. It's really thinking about what are the leadership skills you bring to the table, what are the senior management skills you bring to the table, project leadership, project management, that's all been discussed today. But think more broadly about the business skills that you have along with your subject matter expertise, because those are skills, I can tell you, that do not exist in a lot of early stage businesses. I work very closely with a lot of very clever AI specialists. That's what they do. They're brilliant at it. It's like speaking a different language to me. And I'm the one that will be asking questions about, yeah, I think that's great, but could you just explain when you're going to generate some revenue? Or can you explain where's the profit in this model? And things like, have you thought about where your brand is perceived in the market? Simple things like, and I'm not joking, this is true, PR marketing. I work with a founder who's amazing, very clever. He looks at me really puzzled when I use those words. PR marketing, brand, what do you mean by that? So, but in general, there are a shortage of skills. It's not just in the pharma industry, it's going to be across broad industries as well, fintech especially. But you've all got skills that are still needed as we move forward. In the next few years in particular, I still feel that all of us at this level in our career are still going to be highly relevant. So yes, you've got to upskill. The point has already been made, make yourself familiar with AI. Yes, I think it's a great idea. Why not? Some of it's quite interesting. Some of it can be fun. And I think just ensuring that you understand what is relevant to your upskilling, do you want to be an AI expert? Just make sure it's relevant to where you want to be and the types of companies that you want to attract. And I think if it's a period of uncertainty for you, especially if you've been in a career for 10, 15, 20 years, suddenly this environment looks very unusual and a bit scary, I would say give yourself patience. Sometimes it's great to take a little bit of a step back and instead of sort of trying to jump straight in, think about where you want to go as opposed to where you've been. And I've definitely had to take some breathing space in my career before, and it's not comfortable at first, but you kind of get used to doing other things. So that's what I would also encourage. If the role you're looking for is not around at the moment, then maybe just go distract yourself with something that you upskill and do something completely different. New networks. I know we've all talked about LinkedIn. Obviously, Phraktion, of course, is a fantastic resource. We all know lots of people, and it's a fantastic industry for us to tap into our network. But don't be afraid to try and find other sources. Particularly look at smaller companies, whether it's med device, whether it's a remote patient monitoring tool, whatever it is, think about where your skills can be relevant, because there's a lot of businesses out there at the moment. They'll be smaller, but they need your skills, and you can multitask. We've talked about that today. So I would want to encourage you to think very differently about how you approach a business that's of interest to you. Maybe you don't know anyone, but there's perhaps a way in. And there's lots of conversations I've had over the last few years with the work that I do that has really expanded my network I can't say without trying. Of course, you've got to try, but it's not as hard as you might think when you start out. So I see us more evolving. We're not obsolete yet, I can tell you that. So I want to encourage you all. Fortune favours the brave. We've talked enough about embracing technology. It's interesting, it's fascinating. Just find the part of it that you enjoy the most. We can't stop it. It's not a panacea. I see that all the time, and we talk about it. It can be a bit scary, or we can make the assumption that technology is actually just going to just solve all our problems, and that actually isn't the case. So there's still a lot of need for your talent, is what I would say. What's already been touched on today, but these are the things that I see a lot. Do you really need a permanent job for the next 5, 10 years? How about doing different flexible roles, maybe a bit of interim, maybe short term? This is another way of broadening your skill set. And actually, it can be really fun. I mean, I'm working with some really interesting people. Sometimes, behind the scenes, there's a bit of an eye roll because I'm like, oh my God, this is so easy. But most of the time, it's really fun. And I actually love to be able to use the skills I've got and bring my experience to the table for younger people coming through. So it does give you, it broadens your perspective, improves and increases your skill set, but it can also be really fun. And I don't know, there's some freedom to it as well. So final slide, you'll be pleased to know, because I'm holding you up from getting to the bar. We are in an environment today where, as I think we all recognise, it's not necessarily comfortable. We saw this with COVID, actually. I think that was a big shock for everybody. We had to start to adapt. We had to do things differently. And I kind of feel with the environment that we're in, it's the next wave. It's COVID-like, but I think what's going to happen this time is we're going to see longer-term changes and longer-term impact, but it's not necessarily a negative thing. I just believe that if you adapt and embrace to this dynamic environment, lots of really interesting things are going to happen. It might not happen overnight, but it won't take a long time for you to really start to enjoy this environment that actually there's still a lot of opportunity here in healthcare. And I feel that the final thing I'm going to say is AI and humanism is a big thing for me. Ultimately, I don't believe that technology is the panacea. I still don't believe that's going to be the case over the next few years. And we are still required. Those emotional skills are still vital. I know that's already been said today, but I'm a big believer in that. And I think that sort of helps to level the playing field just a little bit when we might think we're being overrun by robots. So you're not obsolete, but I'm sure you're really keen to get to the bar, so I'll be quiet.